over the last few days, I've been thinking, what is it about my drawing journey, my experience, the way in which I've gone about quite consciously trying to improve my drawing ability? What is it about this? What are the main areas that I can identify now looking back as perhaps the elements that were key in my progressing and reaching the point where I have in terms of what I draw and the way I draw? And when I thought about it, I came up with about half a dozen areas that I think were really key. So let me share them with you now. And if you have other areas that you think were key in your drawing progression that I haven't mentioned, please tell us in the comments. The first one I've often seen as a bit of a personality problem rather than an advantage. And that was, I've always been someone who perhaps has seen problems very easily. I've always been someone who has been able to, at least in my mind, identify things that I think are either wrong or at least are weak, that aren't working very well. I don't mean particularly in drawing, I mean in life in general. But for my drawing, this mindset, this way of thinking, proved to be tremendously beneficial, because we can't progress past things that are problems that we don't identify. I had a friend who, much to my surprise once when I was visiting them, told me that they'd been going to some drawing classes and had done a lot of drawing. And I was looking through their drawings thinking, wow, these are so much better than I thought. But when I said, so, what are you going to do now? They said to me, oh, I'm not doing anymore. I think I've gone as far as I can there. And I thought, I think you could go a lot further, though you've got a great start to do so. But in their mind, these drawings were as good as could be done. And while I think it's very helpful from a motivation point of view to impress ourselves sometimes with our drawings, and I know that feeling too, when I've done something that I felt really quite pleased, if not even proud about, it encourages me to go further. But if at the same time, I'm not trying to find problems, I'm not trying to identify issues or weaknesses, then I'm going to keep drawing them for the same reasons I have up to that point. So never being shy, never being defensive, so that I can't say, okay, what's not working, has been a tremendous help. And it leads on to my second point, which I think has been tremendously helpful in my drawing development. And that's this. Instead of letting all the problems I've seen with my drawings discourage me and make me feel I can't do it, I've instead let them focus my attention, my energy, my time, and my drawing into the areas that I need to work on. Every problem I've identified in my drawing has led me to try and find a solution to that problem. And there is no problem in my drawing where there is no solution out there. There is a solution to every weakness in my drawing, because I need to continually change what I'm doing unless I'm happy with what I'm doing. And if I don't see the weaknesses of my drawing, then I may be happy with them and I may not feel the need to change, which again is why it's important to really work hard to identify areas of our artworks that aren't working the way we'd like them to. When I look through drawing accounts on Instagram, I often see page after page from the one artist where all the drawings have the same weakness. Repeated drawing after drawing. And part of me ends up thinking, I wish I could just tell them, why don't you think of this instead of this? Because if we stay with our mistakes, if we stay with drawing things not quite right, we will get so used to seeing them that way that we'll actually come to lose the ability to see them as anything but how it should be. We need to identify parts of our drawing that are weak, that don't look right, but then we need to use that to give us a focus on where to go. Every time I draw, I have a number of areas that are still my focus that I particularly pay attention to, because I've learned these are the areas where I may not get it as right as I want to, as accurately as I want to, if I don't really pay attention. And if you're wondering why I'm videoing in the rain, the east coast of Australia currently has an extreme weather event all the way down from Queensland to Victoria. So it's not looking like it's going to stop raining anytime soon. And if you're finding these interesting, please, why not hit the like button for me right now? But I think the third mindset, which really helped me propel forward in my drawing, was that right from the start, I was never worried about producing artworks. And it's interesting with my drawing because this was very different to my painting. When I began art at the age of 50, I spent 15 years just doing oil painting. And right from the start, I was very focused on, I want to be able to sell these, I want them to look right, I want them to be artworks. And looking back, I can see how that really slowed down my painting development and made me narrow into the way I thought and did things. Stylistically, I think it stopped me being as creative as I could have been and getting the results I could have had. But when I started drawing, I didn't have this problem. I wasn't thinking of producing artworks at all. I was just thinking of drawing and of drawing the best I could. And that took all the pressure off me and it freed me to experiment because as far as I was concerned, I was learning to draw. And I still actually have that mindset. When I do a drawing, unless it's a commission, I'm not thinking of it as an artwork. It's just a drawing. It's just a drawing. There's no pressure on me as to how it turns out. In my mind, if it doesn't turn out, I don't have to use it or I can do it again. So, not thinking artwork, but thinking drawing practice and development and fun has really freed me up, I think, to take more risks with my thinking, with my mark making, and it's given me more confidence with my line work because I've not been scared of making a mistake that's going to ruin the artwork. In fact, it's given me a really healthy attitude towards making mistakes. I've learnt that in most cases, mistakes don't really matter and they're not really noticeable at the end the way they are when we just make them. These next points now are a little more focused on technique issues rather than on general ways of thinking issues. But I think these are the technique issues that have been absolutely pivotal, have been crucial to my drawing development. And the first one is, sometime in the 1980s, someone gave me the book Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain to read. And the book explains and shows the difference that drawing an upside down reference into an upside down drawing makes compared to the same person doing the same drawing the right way up in the reference and the right way up on the paper. And the point was that an upside down reference forces us to observe more carefully, and instead of drawing what we think we've seen, we draw what we actually see. And what I came to very quickly realize is that what we think we've seen is often more based on memories we have of that object or subject from the past. But of course, the memory I have isn't necessarily how it looks now, here, from this angle, in these conditions. And so what I'm actually drawing is more created from my imagination than from the reference. And it's not that I couldn't draw what was in the reference as opposed to my imagination, I just didn't realize I was doing it. Often say when we get the perspective angle wrong, it's not that we can't draw a line at a certain angle, but I haven't observed the angle carefully enough to really see just how steep the angle is. And therefore, I can't draw it because I haven't seen it. I'm going to be drawing what I think I've seen. And observation isn't just how we draw a particular part of the drawing, a particular object. It's also the relationship between one object to another in the same composition. So learning to see the gap between things as a space to draw, as a negative space to draw, but it's just as much information for me to use to my advantage as the actual shape of an object that might be there. It's so important that all of these observational things are done before I put my pen on the paper. This next one is probably, in my mind, the technique issue that I think is probably most associated with me and my drawing and certainly my channel. And that's, at some point, I came to realize the shortfall, the weaknesses of focusing on shapes and trying to draw them, and instead trying to visualize the effect of whatever the subject was in the context of this particular composition, of this particular scene, and working out what marks can I make that will capture the effect. I think because most of us as children, certainly people who like to draw, often really enjoyed cartoons and often drew from cartoons, copied cartoons when we were young, and we got very used to thinking of drawing as doing outlines. And yet, if we base our drawing on the outlining that we experienced in cartoons and cartoon drawing as kids, then our drawings as adults are going to end up looking very cartoon-like, which is fine if that's what we want, but it's a problem if we're wanting a greater amount of realism in our drawing. And for me, I think the breakthrough was that before I started to draw, I painted 15 years, but I painted particularly tree canopies. I painted this sort of scene where I couldn't possibly paint all the detail. I had to look at the foliage, whatever it was, and think, what's the overall visual effect of all of this foliage together, and how can I capture that effect? And I can remember when I began drawing, and at first I was drawing in pencil, and some of my architecture had trees around it. I remember thinking, how can I draw a tree? And at some point I consciously thought, well, when I was painting, I tried to see the effect and capture the effect with my brush and with colour and value, which is a more straightforward, a more obvious thing to do with paint. But I soon realised the answer was the same with drawing, although line became my tool. And so hatching became very important. And I also realised that a lot of the time, the shadows, often the shadows between objects, was even more important to capture the effect than to try and draw the actual object itself. And once we start to draw the effect of what we see, not the detail of what we see, then suddenly we can draw things of incredible complexity because we're not trying to draw it all. Instead, we're trying to put marks on the paper that capture the effect. And of course, what those marks would be for those things closer are very different from how they might be for the same things much further away. Because what we see in life really is a series of visual effects, and we never see the whole thing at once. Usually, whatever we're looking at, whatever's in our line of vision, we see in more detail, and then on the periphery around that, we see it in less detail as well. And so if I capture that effect in my drawing, it ends up giving a sense of realism. I left this factor till last because it's the last one that probably I've come to truly appreciate and to start to consciously work into my drawing. And that's a better understanding of values and a more creative use of values in my work. Now, when we talk about values, we're not talking about how much our drawing is worth, but we're talking about lights and darks. And the lights and darks do lots of things compositionally and towards visual impact in a scene. I think when I first started drawing, for me, values was really just about shadows and copying what I saw in the scene. But I've come to realize that, in fact, values are a tool that we have at our disposal. And I've come to realize that everything that I see in my reference, whether it's a photo or whether it's in front of me, is a starting point for my creativity. If I'm not going to go beyond a photo, I might as well just frame the photo. And I found that not just coming to perceive value, to perceive lights and darks more carefully, and of course colour can be confusing because a strong deep colour can still be a light value, and a lighter dark colour can be a stronger value, can actually be a darker dark. We do need to learn how to translate colour into value. The best way of doing this is with a digital photo, just desaturating the colour and watching it go from colour to black and white. That shows us instantly how those colours translate into value. And sometimes I increase the contrast to make the darks darker and the lights lighter, because that often has a more dramatic impact. And that can also give me ideas of how I might tweak the values in this particular scene, in this particular reference, to improve the visual impact, ramp up the wow factor of my drawing. A solid understanding of value and confidence in picking the darkest and the lightest values we can, and not letting things all fall into mid values, which ends up creating visually a fairly bland effect, is a great way to develop our drawing. It's a bit like a flavour enhancer for our finished artwork. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I often have people comment, my aim is to draw as well as you do. And my comment is always, look, I hope you draw better than I do. And of course, what I really want is for everyone to be able to draw as well as they can from their own individual creativity. But I hope that my having made quite explicit these half dozen areas that I've been able to identify as the ones that have most propelled me along on my drawing journey are perhaps helpful, at least with some of them, to give some stronger direction or focus on something to work on in your drawing journey. But of course, wherever you're at in your drawing journey, however your drawings turn out, whatever challenges or inspirations you may have ahead of you, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.